Well, thank you very, very much for the opportunity to share together. Very frankly, we've not done this for several years, but we'll tell you a little bit about how we got to all of this. As we were looking at what we're going to do together over the next several weeks, I think a good text for us to keep in mind would be the text in James 1. And because of the order in which we're going to do this, I'm going to quote it a little bit out of order. But there are three things it says about being, first of all, slow to speak. And that's normally how that's translated. But that word slow really can talk about being measured and thoughtful as we go through our speaking process, not flying off the handle. You know, the opposite of doing it quickly is to do it slowly. And so I think that's a good number one, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is a talking and tracking concept. Notice it does not say talking and listening. One of the things that happens is we don't track, and that's because we don't have shared information. Our goal is to get everybody on the same page so that when we are involved in a conversation, we know what we're doing. The second thing that says in James 1 is that we are to be quick to listen. It actually is the first thing it says, but we're doing them in a different order. And then the third thing, it says slow to wrath. And the third thing we're going to talk about on the weekend after the 4th is conflict resolution, how to map issues, and how to work through those kinds of things. So I think that we're pretty much there. We do kind of have one little disclaimer, and that is if you're looking for MMFTs, if you're looking for Masters of Marriage and Family Therapy, neither one of us are.
I'm leaving.
Yeah, so if you want to choose another class, that'll be fine. But what did happen to us is that as we did ministry in churches that did not have additional staff. Virtually everywhere that we did ministry, God did really great things and empowered wonderful things. And in Michigan, we did eventually get additional staff. We started with 150 and 10 years later ended up with 450. And we did have a youth minister by that time. And we had other people who could help with things. But I began always just doing it. Same thing when we were at Fort Gibson, and we about doubled in 8 years. But we just started with, so what that meant is we had to do everything. We were the adult ed, we had to do that. What would be good adult ed? What would we need to do? What kind of classes? So along the way, what happened, thinking about us together, is that we did couples communication program certifications. And so you become a licensed purchaser. And when we were in Michigan, we were encouraged to get involved with a governmental agency called STEP, Region 13, and we did STEP, which is Systematic Training in Effective Parenting. And we taught classes, and a lot of the people who came to the classes had to come to the classes because their kids were in prison. And so they had to come to class, and it was a part of that. It was really, really interesting to interact with a lot of people in the community that we would not have interacted with otherwise. And the part of that came to be parenting effectiveness, communication, and all of that we did together. And then when I did my education formally, and if there was something I could take a class on, I did it. So whenever Harding offered a graduate class by extension at Ohio Valley, and it was you could become an MBTI, Myers-Briggs certified user, hey, I want to do that. So, I take the 3 hours of graduate school to do that, and Taylor Johnson, same way, and the fundamental interpersonal relationship organizational things, all of that kind of stuff, whatever it was, the Prepare Enrich, when we began to do marriage counseling, the circumplex model, all of that doesn't matter. That's just kind of what we did. But really, our story has to go back before that, because all of that is what we did because we were doing ministry. But there's probably 10 or 12 years of our marriage before that, and even before that, before we knew one another. So Jan is going to say a few things to get us caught up to speed about who we are.
Oh, growing up in my family,
It meant that whatever Daddy said, that's how it was going to be. I never saw my mom and dad communicate in any way as far as solving problems or making decisions together. And some of you may have grown up in a similar family that I did. Well, when Bob and I were married, I experienced a totally different attitude from Bob. And both of us wanted to love and respect one another, but we weren't skilled. We didn't really know how to communicate, but the desire was there. So taking classes to become facilitators of building your child's self-esteem and the STEP program that Bob has already mentioned led us to then take our first couples communication course. We had to work very closely together in several places where we were, in 2 ministries. Bob being the minister, I became the church secretary. And then when we went to Ohio Valley
Sometimes paid, sometimes unpaid.
on my part, not his. Then when we went to Ohio Valley College, he was the director of Bible and then became also a vice president. And I was fortunate enough to be selected to be his administrative assistant.
You're so fortunate.
But doing that, communication had to be the key for a successful working environment and a peaceful home life. Before we go any further though, I have something that I want to share with you. There's one thing, I do not like talking in a group setting. I know that's weird, but, and when we first started doing things, often the feedback was, well, we would have liked to have heard a little bit more from Jan, but Jan didn't want to talk anymore. So please understand that if Bob has the major talking role, it's fine with me, I'm okay with it.
I think one of the things that we did as a couple, just to give a little more orientation and then we'll get to what we're doing. I think one of the eye-openers for me, I mean, we were committed to trying to learn how to talk and how to communicate, but we didn't always do it well. I mean, we were young. You have all of the stuff going on that's always going on. But I think when we did Marriage Encounter, that was really an eye-opener to me. If you've ever done Marriage Encounter, if you know anything about it, have read about it, how do you feel about, how do you feel about, how do you feel about? I mean, and to come up with a whole new feeling vocabulary, which may have been thinking vocabulary, but to come up with whole new vocabulary and to talk about stuff that could have been conflicted, but to use different words and to speak for yourself. And so some of the things that we learned there, as we've done additional coursework, you know, we said, oh wow, that was kind of second nature in that kind of stuff. So let's get going with kind of what we're going to share in this time is what we did in Couples Communication Program. And so there were 4 modules. We're going to only do 3 of them. We're going to do the first 3, but we're going to make some comments. The 3 modules is, first of all, how to develop talking skills. There are 6 talking skills. We're going to talk about those today because the truth of the matter is that most of us, when we get in stressful situations, we don't know how to talk. And we revert to the same kind of language that we always use when we get under stress and we get conflicts, and we don't have a thoughtful way to work through all of the dynamics of a particular question. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how to talk. And that is not only caring about yourself enough to be transparent, but it also says, I care enough about you and trust you enough that I think you can be trusted with what I'm going to share about myself. This is really self-revelatory. You really have to get into what's going on inside of me. And we'll talk about that. The second part of it is to care enough about your partner to track when they talk. If we both know what's going on, when Jan talks, I listen, but I like to describe it as tracking. I'm tracking with her. I know what's going on in her mind, I know what she's trying to do, and I know what I'm supposed to do with what she's sharing, and vice versa, as in a conversation. The third thing we're going to talk about is how to map an issue, put the issue right at the middle, and use our skill sets. And then the thing we're not going to spend a lot of time on is the various styles of communication. We learned 4. I think there are probably 40 or 400. I mean, any word that you can put with talk, you could probably say, sometimes I have to do that. Small talk, shop talk, wonder talk, what would happen if talk, all of the things we do in our marriages. You know, planning talk, and 2 things that were really important to us were internal talk and external talk, and Jan's going to talk about those.
So there are 2 different thought processes. Bob and I do not share the same thought process. Yes.
We do not.
We do not. He is an external thinker, I'm an internal thinker. And as an external thinker, he will talk a long time to figure out what he thinks.
Yeah. My boys thought that was kind of like a lecture.
Yes.
One of our sons is here, he can nod his head. Yeah, why can't Dad tell us what he thinks?
It took a very long time for Dad to tell us what he thought. And our boys and I would sit there thinking, all right, where's the end? Where's the conclusion? But it was such a relief then whenever Bob and I took the couples communication class to understand, oh, it's okay. This is what's going on. On the other hand, you can guess, I'm internal. I'm a feeler. I don't want to express myself right off the bat because I want to think about it for a while. And Bob has, when he understood about my being internal, then when we have an issue, we agree that within 24 hours we're going to come back together. And I'm going to get on the computer and type out everything that I can think of so that we can then have an honest communication session.
Yeah, thank you, Myers-Briggs, because when you understand what it means to think internally, process internally, they call it introvert. It doesn't have to do with how friendly you are or how gregarious you are, but when you understand introvert and extrovert, you know, and what happened early on in our marriage, you know, hey, I want to resolve this. And so what do? I put pressure. I put pressure on the system. And I say, hey, we got to get this resolved. And so you have to talk to me right now. What do you mean turning your back? You got that, right? You understand how that works? Hey, whenever we understood it's okay, contract, come back together. Most of us are better off anyway when we can kind of cool down and really think about it and deal with that. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on shop talk and work talk and conflict resolution talk, except to the fact that it's in some of this, but we're going to deal with the first 3 of what you see there, and that is basically talking, listening, and conflict resolution or how to deal with particular issues.
And we're going to start with a real simple background of how behavior affects our attitude. And in the figure 1, both partners are uncaring, and the arrows are pointing down. And then in the 2 and 3, one is one way and one is the other way. And so again, there's conflict. And we all want to get to the 4th one where the arrows are up so that we can talk and listen and be caring of one another.
Yeah, and I think another thing to notice here is that when it says uncaring, that's not necessarily a negative. It means my wife wants to talk about something, Jan wants to talk about something, I don't care. But I have to listen anyway. I have to track. I have to be a part of this because it matters to her. And so when you say caring and uncaring, you're not necessarily talking about, you know, what a terrible person you are. But we're talking about whether we have investment in this. And the truth of the matter is that until we both come to a point in our relationship where we can be caring about the things that matter to either one of the partners or to us, we're going to have trouble. Now let's take it to the next step.
So now we have caring or attitude, and behavior is a skill. And if you are uncaring and have no skill in communication, then that person could easily become abusive, whether it's intentionally or unintentionally. And if you are uncaring and you have skill, what happens? You can be manipulative. Then we have one caring and unskilled, and there are often misunderstandings. And then we get to where we really want to be, to where we are caring and skilled, communication occurs, our self-esteem is built, and our relationship becomes a positive one.
Let me just say about the word abuse, because these are slides directly from Couple Communication Program. We use in our culture the word abuse to talk about people without skill and who do not care. But in this particular set of slides, we're talking more about manipulation. Someone who doesn't care, but they know how to manipulate that other person. They know what they're doing. And so I would sometimes say about a person who is manipulative, they're abusive. We might intermingle those. Here's a person manipulative, they're abusing the situation emotionally and perhaps in other ways. But here the point is, I think what I would want to say about us, and Jan can nod her head or say something, is that for probably at least the first, 5-6 years, maybe a little longer, we spent an awful lot of time in the lower left corner. We really cared, we really wanted to, but we didn't know what we were doing. We'd never taken a course, we hadn't taken communication courses, we didn't know what we were doing. And it just took a little bit of skill development, which is what we're hoping for you in this time that we spend together. It just took a little bit of skill development to really get past some of those misunderstandings. And when you get to a misunderstanding, know what to do to work through that and to really begin to build helpful relationships. Okay, so here's the essence of what you've got. You've got a handout. It is basically what's known as an awareness wheel. If you Google awareness wheel, you're going to get something like this or a version of it, and some of it's going to come up off of Couple Communication Program websites. So Jen's going to start us on just understanding what you're looking at.
First of all, the sensory data includes verbal and nonverbal input. You can use your 5 senses: sight, sound, taste, smell, and touch.
This is kind of like a clock in that it kind of begins like at 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock. And so in a conversation, the first thing you have to establish is what's going on. What am I, and she mentioned the 5 empirical senses, but most of the time it's going to be what we've seen or what we've heard. We've either seen something happen, we have certain perceptions of what's been going on in a marriage or with our kids or whatever it might be. And so when we talk about what we've seen, what we've heard, remember that communication is both verbal and nonverbal, as she mentioned. So that's kind of what the first little fifth looks like.
Then we go to what we share as our thoughts. We share what we think, what we believe, what has happened, what we think about certain events and happenings, and how we analyze it.
And on that word expectation, don't get to thinking too future, because it's kind of like, well, I thought that, and so I'm talking about my past expectations. I thought by this time we would, and those are all thoughts. They're past thoughts, but those qualify as thoughts, even though you're anticipating. You could probably come up with some other words to describe thinking. But an important part is to distinguish what we're talking about in thoughts or thinking and the next area.
Okay, we want to talk about feelings. We all have feelings. Feelings are our emotions. And emotions, you must remember, emotions are not wrong. Your emotion, your feeling cannot be denied. If you deny it, then you are being judgmental. So you never want to deny
You shouldn't feel that way, for example.
But I do.
Yeah.
So you don't want to confuse what you think and with what you feel. And usually the phrase, "I feel that," is really a thinking statement. It is not a feeling statement. So we want to learn emotion and feeling words, and we have a list of them past the words sad, mad, glad, happy, and
Most of us mad, sad, glad, and bad, right? I feel bad, glad, mad, or sad. Those are the four that most everyone reverts to. I hope you caught what Jen said about "I feel that," because when you say "I feel that," you're probably using a thinking idea, but you're couching it in feeling words. You know, if you can say "I feel," what do you feel? Do you feel happy, sad, bad, glad, mad? But there are a lot of other things. Disgusted, uncertain, other things that come along that are better. Uncertain, you know, has a little bit of a type of thinking with it. So it's very, very tricky in this. But the key is that we're tracking with one another and we're listening to one another and understanding what's going on. So the first three: sensory data, thoughts, feelings.
And then we come to wants. Some words that are associated with wants would be our goals, hopes, interests, wishes, dreams, desires, intentions. I want to be, I want to do, I want to have, I want for you, and I want for us.
Yeah, so actually there's 4 areas here. It says for self, for partner, for us. You have those on the outside of your little circle on your handout. Another one is the others that they have there. And so what's missing here, it says others, but to me what's missing on this particular slide is her. You know, she's under others, but there's some very specific things when you think about communication in the context of a marriage, where it has to be, I want what I want for me, what I want for her, what I want for us, and then others would be like what I want for our kids, what I want for our grandkids when we're trying to resolve difficulties, conflicts, those kinds of things. So the 4th area that we talk about is the area of wants and
Actions. Past, present, and future. I think of actions as behaviors and plans, accomplishments, promises, consequences, activities, achievements, what you have done, are doing, are going to do, or will do.
Okay, let me go back up here because Jan worked on this and we worked on it together. She said earlier on the very first slide, "I want to share something with you." She said, "I don't like to talk in a group setting. I feel uncomfortable." She said, we have had seminars and done seminars together, like for example our seminar, What Happens When Couples Pray Together, nearly always the response is, "We'd like to hear more from Jan." Identify sensory data. This is what has happened to us. This is what we see. We can say, this is what people have told us. This is what we see going on. And then to say, this is how I feel, this is what I think, and I want to share something with you. And then she said, because she kind of read this, because we worked on it, "Please understand that as I talk," she's saying, "I understand something, I want you to understand the same thing, that I'm talking all I want to." And so the point of that, and I think when you develop the skill, because she did not write that with the idea of, okay, well, we need a good illustration. I was reviewing what she had written because of that internal thinking thing, and I said, look what you did. And we learned to talk this way. We learned to begin to talk about what's happened, what we're perceiving, because where's the conflict lots of times?
Perception.
We didn't see the same thing. We saw the same accident. We're both witnesses, but there's 2 witnesses to the same accident, and they have 2 different versions of it. That happens in marriage. Because we have different perceptions of our kids, different perceptions of our grandkids. And so she had an experience with him, and so she's softer, or I'm softer as a result of that. So the first thing you have to do is get your perception lined up. And that's why you begin with sensory data. And we could talk about and maybe be in disagreement about how many people have said we'd like to hear more from Jan. We may not be in agreement about that, but we know that's a part of the sensory data. And then she moved to say, now here's some thinking that I want you to be able to buy into. Because here's the way I think about this, here's how, I see us working in the past, I think that works. She moved to some things about uncomfortable and other kinds of feeling words. And then she talked about wants. And she did not tell you about plans, but our plan is do the best we can and get her to say as much as she can.
And he's going to take over.
So I just wanted to go back and just kind of notice that for you, because our hope is skill. And this is really fun. And when we started doing this, it was really fun because it got, and even our sons a little bit, because we talk about this. And I don't know whether Michael remembers much of that, but you're not supposed to be talking about feelings yet because we haven't talked about thinking yet. And it was really fun as we tried to help our kids learn accountability, and as we tried to deal with consequences and natural consequences and some of the things that go with parenting. And so, to begin this process together, those of you who are here as a couple are going to be really blessed if you can kind of just work on this and have fun doing it, or take it and say, okay, let's see if we can learn a little bit about how talking works. So that we can completely debrief, and because a lot of times the conflicts either come from different perceptions or they come because there's holes in our awareness of what's going on in the life of the other person. Sometimes that's because we don't trust the other person. We're afraid of what they'll do if they really know some little part of our life. But in the context of a really healthy marriage, we have to learn these things, and with healthy relationship with kids or whatever it might be. So those are those 5 areas that we've tried to get in your mind. Hopefully you're starting to get them. The sensory data, the thinking, the feeling, the wants, and the actions. Now let's try it again with a little bit more. I think you want to go to the next one on that. Okay, so what we have on this one, what's the difference? What we did here in the very middle is we put an issue. That's what you're seeing. You didn't see that on the first one that we did here. We didn't have that issue in the middle. We're just trying to make you aware of the 5 areas. But now look what happens here. This is work talk. We've got to work through something. When we begin next week, we have been working on reconstructing a conversation we had when we had tried to sell our house a couple of times. It hadn't sold, and we finally made the decision that we would just rent an apartment in Tulsa. We were moving to Tulsa, and we're going to bring this to the Lord, and we're going to work through that. We have written out the conversation. I think we still need to review it. I think we have it all there, and we're going to begin with that next week to kind of try to review and see how that works. But here are the questions that you have to deal with. Number 1, on any issue.
Sometimes the issue can be only your issue, not our issue. But it works the same way. Sorry.
Yeah, and if it's her issue, I have to know how to track with her. Okay. What I was going to say is to notice how this begins. It says self-talk. It says self-talk. So we identify the issue, and I don't have any obligation to say to Jan, well, you saw this, didn't you? Don't you remember this? Or some of the other wonderful illustrations that we got. Mitch set this up so very, very good. It is so easy to come up with you statements that don't even begin with you, that are blaming or expecting things and kind of criticizing underneath the surface in that. So when I begin to think about this, and if we contract to talk about something after 24 hours, all my job is to say is, what have I seen in her? I don't have to worry about what she's seen and heard or what she should have seen and heard. I just have to be ready to contribute what I have seen and heard. I just have to think in terms of what I see going on, my thoughts, my beliefs, my expectations. So none of that like, well, don't you think? There's a really subtle way to insert a you statement. Don't you think? And how I'm feeling, what kinds of things. And this is probably the hardest part for us to get in touch with. We're going to give you some help on this in a minute. What do I want out of this? What have I been doing? What's not been working? What do I propose to do? And all of that comes together, and I just want to say right here, past actions, current actions, future actions, and we'll show this in our little beginning point next week. You contract and you say, okay, we're going to do this for a week, or we're going to do this for a month, or we're going to do this for 6 months. We're going to list the house for 6 months, and then we're going to see what happens. And so it's not like you finish the conversation and it never comes up again. Because a lot of times conflicts arise because, again, there's a problem because we don't come back and debrief and update. We don't update one another. All of us get new sensory data, but we don't have any mechanism for sharing it. We just think, oh man, I hope that doesn't come up and then we won't have to talk about it. No, you don't. You want to talk about it. Because if nothing else, just to check. Okay, everything's cool. Everything's working okay in that. Okay, so 2 more slides. We probably need to work on this to get to the point where we need to be.
Can I say something?
Yeah, sure, fine. Go ahead.
On that one.
Okay, back up.
You start on sensory data. What have I seen and heard always when there's an issue?
Right.
Okay.
Always you begin.
It's the foundation.
Okay.
Yeah. Now let's say. Go ahead.
I wanted to say, I hear people sometimes in work situations say, well, I don't like conflict, so they don't want to talk about something. I'm thinking, I don't know that anyone likes conflict. So when people say that to me, yeah.
Some people do. Yeah.
Maybe none of my friends.
Yeah. You know, I think right here is a good place to understand the people who don't like conflict, because a lot of times what's missing, just one more. A lot of times what's missing is the skill set. And so when you go down that no skill side, they're either afraid that they will be abused, taken advantage of. Read taken advantage of. I don't like conflict because 2 things happen. I get taken advantage of, or I'm not understood. And if I don't know how to work through conversational models, I'm never going to like talking about anything. Especially if there's the possibility of that, because I don't have the skill set. And so if I develop the skill set, then I can work on that. I think that's a really, really valuable point to try to bring there. So when we started out talking about 6 talking skills, and you may think, wow, this is easy. This is a lot harder than it looks. But here are the 6 talking skills. Number 1, speak for self. Commit to saying what needs to be said to show that you care for yourself enough to put it out there to people that you trust, and to show that you trust the other person and care for them. Otherwise, you've got a conflicted relationship, even if there's never any outward conflict, because you're not matched. You're having difficulties. You understand what I'm saying? You're just not connecting. You don't have that friendship commitment that Mitch talked to. I've not said much about Mitch's sermon because some of you haven't heard the sermon, but you know, if all of you had heard the sermon, wow, we could have just worked through Mitch's sermon just kind of step by step and said, okay, this is what he was talking about. This is how you live out what he's talking about insofar as our relationships one with another. These are pretty easy. Describe the sensory data. That's mostly going to be what I've seen and what I've heard. A lot of it's going to be past. Some of it might be present. You have to be careful that you don't blame in the sensory data. I remember when I probably wouldn't start that way. you know, so that I can begin to talk about my thoughts, my ways of processing these things, feelings, what I'd like to see happen out of this, and the action. So here are the skills a little bit better that we're going to use for a summary. This is the slide that you don't have a copy of, but can you see what it says there?
Yes,
All right. Because I know Jan wants to talk more about I and you.
I do.
Yes, she does. Number one, stay on track. If you have put together an issue and you're speaking for yourself on the issue right there in the middle, I think it says stay on track. Because what happens when you have a conflict? I remember when you, and we're not even talking about the conflict we're supposed to be talking about anymore. We're talking about a bunch of garbage that never got cleaned up. And if it will help depersonalize it in your marriage, we do this with our kids all the time. We can't quite forgive and forget. So, I mean, 3 years ago, they messed up when we let them stay out late. And, you know, when they asked to stay out again, we've never resolved that. We've never put that to bed. We've never had the conversation that says everything's cool. And so we have difficulties as parents with our kids in the context of the family because we have all these unresolved issues that are kind of lying right there beneath the surface and are giving us problems in that way. So, okay, sorry.
Okay, but I forgot what I was going to say. I know.
Okay, well, let me ask this as a question. So when I talk about I statements and you statements, are we kind of all tracking, or is there something that needs to be said with that? The easiest way to deal with it is, does it begin with I or does it begin with you? But I've also shown you some very subtle ways to begin a you statement without starting with you, and to do a lot of blaming and that kind of thing. Second talking skill is learn how to really use the empirical senses with your seeing or the hearing, what you've seen or heard. Thoughts, hopefully we've said something about that. I'm going to back out of this for just a moment because if you go to, what is this? If you go to, it's not even, yeah, that's right. No, it's not the right one, I'm sorry. Okay, you're going to have to put up with me for just a moment. I got the wrong one, but it's up here. It won't be hard to get to insofar as talking words. I want to show you this list of talking words, learning how to talk. How does that look? No, that's not it.
Oh, man.
I'm trying to think where to.
I thought you were going to do a feeling.
It's okay.
That's what I'm looking for.
You're using I statements, so it's okay.
Yeah. Oh man, that's a good I statement, isn't it? So, yeah.
Just go to your website.
Okay, here it is. Well, I can't do that. I think I put them here. Words in. Okay, here we are. We got them. That's the handouts. I am going to have to apologize. Okay, I will do what she said. I will go to my website and pull them in here because they're here. I want you to see this because I want you to go to the website if you want this list of words, of feeling words right here. So here's the deal. Here's the feeling vocabulary. We'll speed it up here a little bit bigger maybe. And the way it's put together, I guess I can't get rid of that, is to deal with intense. It's got intense words in the left column, strong words in the second, moderate words and mild words. And let's see if we can get it big enough so you can see. Loved, adored, idolized, enchanted, ardor, infatuated, tender, liked, cared for, esteemed. Each layer across there works with that. And then the next one is alive, intense, vibrant, independent, capable, happy, great. There's a list of those. It's a whole page. And then there's a words that describe feelings, okay? If we go to that, frazzled, I like that one. Sad, rushed, pleasured, frustrated, rested, laughing, nervous, loving. Okay, those words, all of that is available. And I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint now. to work with that. All of that is available if you go to my website, bobyoungresources.com. All you have to do is /feeling-words.pdf. You don't have to get anything else in there, you just put it that way.
That link will be on the website, on the Facebook page, and I will send it to Ken so that it'll be included in the
Okay,
email.
and
next
so
week.
that we can distribute that if you can't get it, but it's right there on the PowerPoint if you want to take time to write it down. And I've given you, tried to give you a quick sample of what you would be looking at there. We probably need to put this together, put it to bed. So here are the 6 talking skills. We were down to emotions, learn how to express wants, learn how to express planning and actions, and again, what we will do, we contract. What we will do, and both of us contributing, trying to make sense of all of that. So, okay, there basically is part 1, talking. Next week is tracking.